you need to have accountability, which means human beings are probably going to need to manipulate some of those stages, and the product won't do that by itself. So you're going to need at least human effort or strategy around controlling conversion rates and committing to revenue targets. That's why salespeople will never be taken out of the equation. A lot of people will say, oh, there needs to be a human face to be the person who's in the brand. It's like, not necessarily, but what a human being does need to get involved in is controlling that predictable revenue engine.
Josh, it is good to be here. It is good to see you. It has been so long. What's going on, Mike?
Paul, I am very happy to be here. Not too much. I'm enjoying this Friday. It's a nice day here in Massachusetts, and looking forward to maybe having an adult beverage at the end of the day.
I am right there with you. It has been a long, long time. I'm glad, I'm starting to get a few gray hairs, but you're looking really good. It's been a long time.
Well, I mean, if you see this when you first wake up in the morning, my dad's got a full gray head of hair, and he started at about 35, and I'm 34, so I'm hiding it pretty well. But definitely got some silver fox potential coming up in these next few years.
Okay, all right. Well, it's the same boat there too. So I'm excited. You've got a great background. Just for context, for everyone listening, you and I go way back. PandaDoc days. I'm going to share my screen and kind of kick it off with reading off your background, where you're from, your early stops. I think this just gives folks like a really nice kind of framing. So I'm over on your page here. Obviously, I know you're from the Northeast, but where are you born and raised?
I'm born and raised in Arlington, Massachusetts, which is about 10 miles northwest of Boston. So truly the greater Boston area. Lived there until I was about 25. Went to school in Connecticut, so stayed in New England for really the first 25 years of my life, but ended up out in San Francisco, as you can see here, in, what was it, 2018, 2016. So yeah, I was out there for a few years and then ended up down in St. Pete, as you know, before coming back to Massachusetts once we had a kid.
For folks that are listening and they're not actually looking at the screen, like you had early roles at US Pavement Services and VM Turbo. I'm going to dig in there in a second, but then just an incredible progression and an incredible career at PandaDoc, where you started as an account executive, became a sales manager, then became the full head of sales. I mean, I remember reporting into you and talking strategy and planning the next years. And then you took over really the whole global team. And I want to hear, kind of what was the story and what did you learn? First question is, think back to when you were graduating high school and you wrapped up, like, what did you want to do? What was your first summer or first year? Did you know you wanted to get in tech? Like, what did that feel like? And what was your first step?
In college or high school?
I guess first take us through, yeah. Did you go to college right after high school or did you take a break?
Yeah, I did. You said high school. I just want to make sure I'm answering the right question. But yeah, college. In the summers I was working at US Pavement. I was laboring, like jackhammering, sweeping, but at a really good hourly rate, and made a lot of money for a kid of that age. It felt like, and financed my debauchery during the school year. But it was it was some of maybe the best job I ever had were those summers, driving around doing a tangible job, and not having very much responsibility, right? Like every minute of work felt like, hey, I'm making money, I'm having fun, I'm outside, and what I'm doing, I show up to a place, it looks like garbage, and then when I'm done, it looks nice, so it felt good to kind of do that on a summer, on a summer break. And they actually offered me like an ops role in the office once I was graduating. So instead of coming back to get out in the fleet again, they were like, hey, can you deploy the fleet? So I took that job, and it was the day after. I graduated. So if I could do anything over again, I would have taken a little bit of time before going into work. But as a young guy, I thought, oh, no, let's get right to it. And so that's kind of how it happened. I didn't really think much. It was just kind of like, oh, hey, I have this opportunity. I need a job. Let's just send it.
Really interesting that that was the first, career step, man. So what led you into tech sales? Was it VM Turbo or did you
Yeah, it
get
was. It was VM Turbo. When I was at US Pavement, it was a family owned company, and I didn't have the same last name, so I knew that I had a ceiling there. No matter how I sliced it, I was going to have to figure out something. But that was kind of the impetus for looking elsewhere. But a lot of people are encouraging me to get into sales, and actually experience with the sales staff at even the construction company. I could tell that it was something that I was interested in. I was certainly interested in making sure that the sales guys were selling stuff that we could actually deliver. And that was a good lesson to learn early in my career. But yeah, it was just kind of like, hey, you're personable, you're competitive. I played sports growing up. I was always competing and being a part of a team. So I think that a lot of those skills definitely were transferable. And so just started over and took a cold calling position at 25 at VM Turbo. And the second I started there and I observed the inside sales vibe and, the guys and gals that had just an absurd amount of energy, I knew I was interested and I was hooked. And so that's kind of how I got into it.
That's definitely interesting. And then what about the next step when you started at PandaDoc? How did that even come up on your radar? It wasn't that well known of a company at the time.
No, I was one of the 30 or something employees, I want to say, in the US. And so, yeah, it wasn't like some crazy brand. I just knew that I wanted to be like the sales directors, the VPs, and, the folks that made VM Turbo such a great place and rode that wave. I felt I was a little late, and I wanted to try to find my version of that, like where I could kind of put my own stamp on something, have a degree of autonomy. I really liked the, uh, you know, if you perform, you kind of can do what you want almost mentality. And so those are the things that made sense. I just wanted to find the right place where I could kind of be myself and potentially have a lot of upside if I did an effective job. And so, yeah, I mean, I found PandaDoc through a sales ops leader who was there. His name was Taft Love. He's an absolute savage. He's an operations minded sales leader, just a really solid guy. Definitely came from a non-traditional background too. He was actually a detective before he got into SaaS. So that related to me. And I think it was part of the reason why he invested in me too. So I found PandaDoc, and I got to say, I got really lucky about picking it, considering it was a rocket ship, but my criteria to pick it was just, are these people good? Does this seem like a product that's practical and that adds some sort of value like immediately? And so, yeah, that was really it. I took a few other calls, but it was clear to me that I wanted to work for that guy Taft. And, people were interviewing me in a white t-shirt when I was showing up in a blazer. And so the West Coast was definitely a different vibe for me, but I loved that aspect of it. And so that's how I ended up there.
That's such a cool story. First of all, I didn't really cross paths with Taft Love, but I'm gonna look him up now because it's great that he was a detective. That makes so much sense. Like it works with sales, and that's a cool background.
Yeah, ops is going to hold you accountable for something. They're certainly going to have the receipts, and if you're a detective, you know how to find evidence.
So put it in context. Like I've seen PandaDoc obviously these past couple years really explode, but what's the space that PandaDoc plays in, and what did it feel like your first year or two? Like what was revenue wise, and then what was the progression like?
Was in a sort of a non-traditional way. Like we did it very efficiently, which is kind of different than some of the stories of massive scale in the valley. But anyway, to back up a little bit, it's a document automation platform. I know you know that. Sort of parallel and competitor to the DocuSigns and the HelloSigns of the world, but um, you know. At least during my tenure, we were focused on trying to find sales leaders that wanted to use documents to drive a customer experience and potentially drive more revenue through that process, along with some efficiencies for your selling team to access content or launch a document through a CRM and make things a little bit easier for them, right? So that's the space, and definitely a large market when DocuSign sort of the juggernaut in that space. So there's a lot of food, and if you're given a really good experience, which is kind of how we differentiated ourselves was, this is a platform. This isn't a commodity, right? So that's kind of the perspective from a high level of the product market fit, and kind of how we identified ourselves there. In the first couple of years, just like every startup, nobody knew what the hell we were doing, but it was really refreshing to be in an environment where everybody feels that way, and you're not surrounded by massive egos. Everybody really feels like they have the opportunity to be autonomous, figure things out for themselves, try new things. So it was an environment that felt very much safe to break some eggs to try to make an omelet. But the people who were successful were the ones who took it very seriously. It was a work hard, play hard sort of an environment. And the people who worked hard consistently performed and consistently built strong, trusting relationships with the founders. And so anyway, that's when I think about the first couple of years, I think much more about the culture and the people and sort of just the newness of trying to figure everything out on your own, which is really the best way to fail forward and learn fast. So that's kind of how it felt being at PandaDoc for the first 24 months.
I really like the way you're saying a lot of that would be good advice for someone who's looking for their next job. Like if they're trying to interview or they're trying to look, like you just shared a lot that they can kind of replay and look for, I want to find that. And they can even ask those questions in interviews. Or like, think about, when you crossed 50 million in ARR, what was the hardest phase?
I would say that there's two phases that sort of come to mind when you bring that up. One is right around that space you're talking about in terms of stage, like going from 10 to 25 million, even to just try to keep it narrow. That's when things start to change. You start to get sophisticated. You start to have some commits from a revenue perspective that you're going to have to accomplish. And so as great as it is to have that freshness, that newness, that feeling of autonomy, and we can try a lot of new things. Phase one of that kind of starting to change, not wholly, but a little bit, is when you actually need to put some sophistication around the predictability of the business. And so I do think that was kind of the first phase where I felt a little bit of turbulence, was bringing in a CRO, really sophisticating the business from a cost and a production standpoint. And I think that is kind of phase one of change in an org. You need to start thinking about what it costs to produce what you're producing, as opposed to just trying to hit a number for the sake of hitting a number. And so, that came with compensation changes, that came with stock changes, and just a whole lot of expectation setting that was new to a lot of the people who had been there. But again, it's those same people that make it through those hard times, who have the right perspective that this is a startup, and if they're really in it for the long haul, that comes with the territory. And that was hard to learn for the first time. But again, anybody who's looking at companies or it plays in this market, it's really important to understand that you're in a startup. You're going to be bootstrapped until your IPO. Like, I don't care what anyone says. Like, you're going to be bootstrapped, and you got to be ready to be flexible and make changes.
I love the way you're talking about kind of measuring cost and what you're getting out of it. So it's the whole, like, what's the dollar that you're putting in and what are you getting out in the return? And that's not always something sales managers or AEs think about, especially in the early days, especially a few years ago. Like, now it seems everyone's locking into this new world where you have to measure both. Go deeper on one question, just in your last couple of years at PandaDoc, think back to like forecasting and getting predictable. Is there one, approach or one tactic that you saw the team implement or that you implemented across your org? Like, what would you say about just getting more predictable?
So we had a pretty decent idea of what our customer experience, like what we wanted it to look like, right? And that's great. And sometimes altruistic in nature when you're trying to figure things out. It comes down to trying to actually put binary stages and apply those to the customer journey, and really the revenue funnel journey. So from top of funnel to mid funnel to even expansion, what are the stages that match your customer journey, and making them binary, meaning there's an input criteria and an exit criteria. And driving accountability through those stages with your leaders is really how we saw it work at PandaDoc from a predictability standpoint. So let's just say you have a demand gen person who's in charge of producing volume of leads, right? Maybe you have a negotiation on what a quality of a lead looks like, and that's something that's variable to marketing and sales leaders to kind of define. Then you have, opportunity to closed won for the AEs to handle. Again, binary stages there. And what you do is you have individuals who are responsible for reporting up their own book of business and their own forecast for whatever the time frame might be, monthly, quarterly, or annually. Managers are connected to that. They know the definitions as well. And maybe they're a little bit more stringent with those definitions, and maybe they back a few things out that the rep maybe was inflating or deflating, maybe pull something forward too. Like it just takes somebody in the front line to audit that. And then connecting that on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly and annually basis in a funnel review where the folks who are accountable for those different stages have to explain what's happening, what the trends are, what they're doing to mitigate things, what might be driving great production or poor production. And you try to course correct with the other folks that drive inputs and outputs on the funnel. So not to oversimplify it, but it's as simple as defining the behaviors that you want to see happen at each stage, holding the folks who do the actual work and audit that process to account for doing that the right way, and then trying to become as accurate as you possibly can with the whole mechanism and get better. So anyway, that was essentially, I think, how we navigated from 10 to 50 million very effectively, very predictably. Was we were all on the same page of how the business worked, and folks were accountable for all the specific stages in that funnel.
Yeah, really, really well kind of laid out. And it sounds easy in principle, but it requires a lot of things. But it requires, shared data set, having the right cadence and the right commitments from every party, and then having that frontline manager and the AEs work really well, and like the truth is highlighted, and then having, leadership that they're able to kind of build a process and make sure that it feels comfortable, that everyone knows enough in how to kind of get your task done, and then the rest of it will all shape. I just remember you were, really good about making that clear. Like, what's your role here? How do you kind of look up to see the bigger picture? And when you see great SaaS companies that are scaling in this kind of super high growth, they must be following a tried and true process. Pause there and kind of shift us over to the fun topic of product-led growth, PLG. It's on everyone's tongue. It's front and center in 2022 and now in 2023. So first question for you is about PLG. Just what's your definition of product-led growth, PLG?
Okay, well, it's amorphous, but I would say first and foremost, is your product attracting leads, right? First off, is that your mechanism for getting folks to sign up? It's not necessarily a person reaching out or knocking on a door or making a phone call. Somebody signs up for a trial, right? Before PLG was even a phrase, at PandaDoc, we just called that inbound. So that's kind of how I feel about PLG as a general term. It is a portion of your inbound channel. And I think it's up for debate, and it's definitely specific to the business that you're working in, how much or how little of a pipeline channel or a revenue channel PLG might be. At PandaDoc, I would say that we were, 90, 100% PLG, and still we started to do some outbound work if we're applying that type of a definition. And it's funny, you get this hesitancy of salespeople being like, PLG, what the hell is that? I felt the same way when inbound became like a super big talking point or category, right? I was coming from a inside sales sweatshop, calling 100, 120 times per day and loving it, like legitimately smiling and dialing, to an inbound mechanism where people are actually interested in talking to you. And I remember sellers in the previous org telling me like I was soft for doing inbound. I'm like, wait a minute, this is just another channel for me to hit my number. I don't know what you're talking about. And I think that other sales folks should think of PLG that way too. It's another channel for you to potentially add value to another logo. I also think that in the specific PLG sort of function of inbound, you got to be a little careful with how you insert humans into what is by design a product led journey. So a lot of that has to do with who are your ICPs, what is a good account, and trying to understand where you intersect human effort into that PLG mechanism. I think that's where a lot of people are kind of scratching their heads right now, is like, hey, this is a shiny new object or idea. How do I implement this immediately if it's not something that already happens? It's like, well, if you have any sort of self-serve, you already have a PLG kind of mechanism. It's like, where in the customer journey, where in the buyer's journey do you want human beings to get involved? And then just to your point of, changes being made sort of in the markets, a lot of layoffs happening and all that stuff. It's like, in my opinion, that's a function of folks feeling a little too inflated. And so, and getting a little too complacent with some of the stuff that happened during COVID. So PLG is a boon to what happened in COVID. And now we're seeing markets kind of settle again, right? And we're seeing orgs trim the fat a little bit more. I think that that's a function of folks overinflating what might be coming from a PLG type of a funnel, and also softening up on the sales tactics that were working before PLG might have been a big channel, right? So I think that people need to be a little bit careful with these types of definitions and understand, A, they're not anything to be afraid of. And B, they're also not everything to put all your money into. So there's somewhere in between there that everybody and all boats can rise, provided you have a very good, flywheel effect there.
Like, think of Salesforce, like that's a great example of one of the top SaaS companies, and they just came out and said, like, most of the new people they hired the past 2 years, just the AEs never got to real production, and they had to look at what's going on in our business. And so a lot of people are going to ask that. But is PLG something that you think will fizzle out? Or do you think in 2, 3, 5 years, do you think most great SaaS companies will all have a specific PLG team, or they'll be talking about, PLG tactics? Or do you think this is going to get kind of brushed aside, and we'll be talking about something else in a few years?
Well, if you think about it from just a straight up startup, or even founding your own company, your first challenge is a product market fit, right? And you need to identify that before you're going to get any sort of investment or really start cooking anyway. So I would say that if we look at outbound, inbound, and PLG as sort of a stage in customer journey, or a diversification effort of revenue channels or pipeline channels, then PLG should come first, because you want to get the market to product market fit value as fast and as easily as possible. And so a no human product led approach to try to get users started to trial something or actually get stuck in your product makes a ton of sense. And I would say once you see that that's working, you should start figuring out how to insert human beings into that equation, because like we said, when you're going from 10 to 50 million in a business, you need to have accountability, which means human beings are probably going to need to manipulate some of those stages, and the product won't do that by itself. So you're going to need at least human effort or strategy around controlling conversion rates and committing to revenue targets. That's why salespeople will never be taken out of the equation. A lot of people will say, oh, there needs to be a human face to be the person who's in the brand. It's like, not necessarily, but what a human being does need to get involved in is controlling that predictable revenue engine. And so when you're putting those definitions into your customer journey, if nobody's accountable for it, it doesn't work. So you need somebody to actually be accountable for the performance. And I think that a lot of product leaders got burnt in the last 2 years saying like, oh, I'll own a revenue target. And they had no idea what they were doing. Right. And so it's like, that's another reason why I think that the PLG side got a lot of trend and is kind of going downhill a little bit. But to keep my metaphor going, it's like, so we figure out product market fit by a PLG type of a motion. We throw in a few salespeople to try to really expand on the revenue opportunity. We put more people involved at the right point in customer journey as an inbound mechanism to try to stoke the flames of the demand and the growth that you're already seeing. And then once you've maximized that effort, or once you're trying to diversify more, then you do the foray into the outbound side of things. And so I think that PLG is actually just speaking to earlier phase in customer life cycle and in business life cycle. And it varies as you get closer to trying to diversify your pipeline and your revenue channels. But the order of operations is product, inbound, outbound.
This is the fun section. So this is where we jump into investor corner. We talk money, finance, any kind of big family plans. You up for that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what is, you going to guide me, or should I just start speaking?
First one is, how would you describe your investing and finance strategy?
Okay. Well, first off, we're in a recession. Like, I don't care what anybody says, like, we're in a recession. There's a ton of inflation. Nobody's employed. Wake up, people. We're in a recession. So what do you do in a recession? You hold, right? Or you buy low if you have the capital to do that. So personally, that's kind of the way I'm thinking about this. We just made a purchase last year, the biggest purchase ever, like buying a house. And so that takes up a lot of cash. And now we're going into a year where a lot of unforeseen things are happening at the house. So I'm trying to keep as much cash on hand for at least like 18 months. And anyway, that's the way I'm thinking about that. From a higher level, once markets maybe settle down and we feel a little bit more comfortable playing some games, we're certainly going to diversify via real estate. So when I was living in St. Pete, before we had the kid, it was like, hey, prices are really good down here. And this is a part of the world where you can rent, 24/7, 365. And if, my son doesn't need to go to school until he's 5 years old, it's like, I'm very interested in trying to figure out a second place that could be some income, but also a place for us to head to during the winters up here in New England. So I'm thinking much more about investing via real estate and continuing to play the startup game to diversify, my portfolio from a stock option standpoint.
No, really interesting. Congrats on the house.
Thank you.
Am I getting you? What room are you in? This looks pretty awesome. Am I getting you in the new house?
Yes. This is what used to be the dining room and is now my office. I like it because there's a bookcase and I have a closet over here where my record player is and my record collection is. So this is kind of my den, daddy's den.
Awesome. Yeah, I like that. Daddy's den. No, that's great that you all got settled. Congrats to you and your family. And yeah, the real estate is really an interesting conversation. A few of our past guests, like they've talked about getting apartments or renting them out and kind of why that's such an exciting play.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
Yes, I've got it somewhere.
Well, that's something that really, I think, changes your perspective around money. And like, once you're in the startup world and you might have gotten some stock options, you start thinking about things from like kind of a different perspective. If you can invest in things at a loss, you start to limit all of your tax implications too. And so like when we actually had a liquidity event at PandaDoc and you start to learn about capital gains and all these other things, you start to think about like, oh, okay, so how do I play the game, but either put my money to work or keep as much of my money as I possibly can. And I hate to be so overtly capitalist here, but you brought up the topic. Investing in real estate is a great way to maximize your cash flow, minimize your taxes, and put your money to work at a loss that will come back to you. So that's kind of why the real estate piece is interesting right now. I'm not saying I'm going to try to like buy condos and build a monopoly board or anything like that, but We want to be connected to Florida, and so this is a great way to do a number of those things.
Yeah, I always played the golf version of Monopoly, so you should get Pebble Beach and get a spyglass and get a few of the California coastline, baby. That's what I'm voting for. No, I really like your approach. I, can I ask about the PandaDoc, you know, liquidity event, or are we allowed to talk about that a little bit?
I don't see why not.
Well, we can scrap the whole thing if this part is if this is not above board. But
I mean, I can't get super detailed with like valuate. Well, I guess valuation's public, but
no, but just a lot of our listeners, they work at, great SaaS companies. Many of them are still private. So there are times when private companies go and do a tender offer. They go and create, liquidity for the current employees or, past employees. When they get a new round of funding, they're able to share, sell some of that. I think I've gone through a couple of those, and obviously you went through it with PandaDoc also. Maybe can you just give like what's the net, like how does that work out, and how are employees notified, and what kind of cash flow can you see happen? How does it work?
sure. Well, first off, like this was like a learning experience for me, of course, as it was happening real time. It was my first job in SaaS, and I got lucky with like a company that kind of did a lot of those things that you're discussing. And I'd like to talk about luck in a second, but yeah, I mean, first off, to all you young folks out there who are thinking about getting into this game, the stock options are way more valuable than they appear when you're negotiating your OTE. I would trade absurd amounts of annual OTE if it equals a lot of options on the back end. And what I mean by that is you're going to get taxed a ton on your wages, and you're spreading that out over 12 months. So if you're splitting straws over 5 or 10K on an annual basis, you really have the wrong perspective of getting into the startup game, right? You're doing that so that you can be an owner of the company to a certain degree and at a cheaper rate than you could buy stock. Think properly about the opportunity, right? You're not going to always pick a winner, and that's the luck component, but you gotta value the stock options and any opportunity where they might be giving some out cheap, or you can negotiate getting a lot. Stay focused on that. The other piece is if you have a lot of faith in the business and you think that there could be an exit, right? Whether that's acquisition or going public or merging, right? Then you should exercise your options as fast as you can as well. And that comes down to another tax implication. If a liquidity event takes place and you've owned your shares for more than 12 months, you go from short-term to long-term capital gains, and that's about 15%. And so if 15% on a large number, even if it's $20,000, I mean, it moves the needle. So I've seen a lot of folks get stuck in that situation when we had a liquidity event, which was what you described, a tender, after we took on a number of new dollars from an investment team, right? Yeah. And so they gave us the opportunity to sell at their valuation price, right? And so that's a huge benefit to folks who have tenure at your company and you're trying to retain for a long period of time. It's also a hedge for you, right? Like maybe the company could tank after a liquidity event like that happens, a tender. If you get a little bit of your capital out at a high price, then you're protecting the rest of that investment, later on, if should something bad happen. So it was definitely like super flying by the seat of my pants, learning all of that stuff real time. But with hindsight, that's kind of what resonates.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing. And I mean, I'll drop a link in like as we share this out that, Carta is typically the resource that people are using to manage all that. And they've gotten better. I think when we went through it, it wasn't all buttoned up and it was kind of a lot of, back of the napkin math. And I was just kind of like, well, let's figure this out. Let's click 20 and see what happens. But the learnings are really key. That, if you're leaving the company, well, I think what I heard is you would strongly recommend, if you can, exercise whatever you can when you leave. Like typically, if you leave a company, you've got 90 days And there are some companies now today, like maybe the more appropriate stance is for a company to give you a 2-year window to exercise, but it's been 90 days at past companies. Try to exercise. If you hold it for 12 months or longer, that's going to be more advantageous if the later liquidity event happens.
That is true. And obviously it comes down to like your own cash flow, right? I'm not your financial advisor. But if you're trying to like maximize the earnings from a stock option, the rule of thumb is to buy it as fast as you can, whether you're leaving or not. Like buy it, because if a liquidity event happens, your tax implication changes substantially. So again, like when we had our tender, fortunately, I had been at PandaDoc for many years, and I was buying my shares. I was buying my vested options, exercising my vested options as quickly as they became vested in some cases. And I'm glad I did, because the capital gains implication is very different. I do think that when you're exiting a company, you should think very critically about exercising the shares that you have. It's not always the right thing to do. I mean, you should be in the game to try to maximize your ROI on shares, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should buy everything that you possibly can. If you don't have faith in the business, then bet against them and don't buy it.
Yeah. Or to play the flip side of that is at least buy
Sure.
buy something that at least you have some skin in the game, and at least you can root them on, and
Right.
you
I mean,
might lose, but
it's a huge benefit of working at the companies that we work for, is that they're trying to encourage you to motivate you, um, by tying you to the business via stock. So uh, you shouldn't sneeze at any opportunity to exercise options. I'm just saying, if you don't have faith, don't blow all of your cash flow because you have options to buy. I wouldn't do that if it didn't make sense either.
right. But no, I really like this thread and this whole conversation because there's been a little bit of negativity. Obviously, there's been ups and downs in the SaaS market, but there's been, this talk about like, did Stripe miss their exit window, and how Airbnb got stuck pre-IPO. And it's like, no one's going to IPO this year. We get it. And 2024, I mean, you said recession. Maybe it's just everything is cooling off, but everything's going to be fine by next year. The point being, I think we're all lucky we've worked at great SaaS companies. We've picked some great winners, and there's probably a lot of other people who are in the same boat, that they haven't had the big IPO moment, but they've worked at companies they really loved, and they've gotten challenged, and hopefully they made, a nice slice of cash in some of these processes that were all private.
You're right, and you use the word luck again, and so I gotta double click on that. So I was just having a conversation recently with a guy. His name's J.R. Butler. He's got a company called Shift Group, and he's trying to help college athletes transition into software sales as like their first job, and telling a lot of stories about how sports help in that environment. And he asked me, what was something that really contributed to my success, either as an athlete or as a sales leader. And I said, manifesting luck. And people think that that's crazy, or that people are just inherently lucky. But I had coaches that always told me that luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And so if there's a formula for luck, then you can hack it. So if you're constantly prepared and you're constantly in places where opportunity strikes, a la a startup, or an early stage company where, hey, if this thing hits, I got real lucky, right? So you can manifest your own luck by working hard and being in the position to score, right? Good things happen when you put the ball on net. Good things happen when you shoot, right? Good things happen when you forget about your misses and you think about the next one. So I truly believe that you can make your own luck, but you have to always be prepared, and you have to always be in positions where opportunity knocks. So you'd be foolish not to say that some sort of luck contributed to your own success, or you'd be way too arrogant, right? But I think from the other side of the spectrum, that there's nobody that's inherently lucky. There's a lot of people that work real hard and put themselves in good positions.
No, it's amen. Hey, it feels like we're back in a war room prepping for big deals. I like your strategy, and I always like your perspective.
Thanks for checking out New Technique. Each week, we sit down with leaders across revenue teams and we dive into product-led growth, sales, and all the secrets in their climb and steps up to success. Hope you've enjoyed listening. There's a whole lot more coming out soon. If you did enjoy it, be sure to pass this along to other teammates, friends. Um, that's the best thing you can do right now is share this out, let others know, and start listening to it. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.